I was last here 10 years ago when I gave a paper on, for a graduate student gender studies and history conference. It's good to be back, although I'm disappointed that I'm back to talk about something unfortunate that one of the departments here at BU did to one of its own students. As the introduction stated, FIRE's mission is to defend and sustain individual rights on America's college campuses. These rights include freedom of speech, freedom of association, religious freedom, due process, legal equality, and the right of private conscience. Colleges and universities in the United States often promise these freedoms, although a lot of them don't really mean it. Liberal arts colleges promise and advertise that they are liberal, tolerant, free, open equally to everyone of every kind and every belief. Students rely on these promises, the promises in the Constitution or the promises in the Code of Student Conduct, when they choose a liberal arts education like the one offered here at BU, rather than, say, at a religious college, which might say that certain values are more important than freedom of expression. But at a public university, the First Amendment applies, and at every private university that values freedom of speech, practically it promises to students that we value freedom of expression so much that it would be a travesty of justice to violate it. For instance, Binghamton's promise is this. Binghamton has maintained a tradition of open communication and freedom of expression. It recognizes that the university is a traditional sphere of free expression, fundamental to the functioning of society. Students have freedom to exercise their intellectual curiosity, to draw conclusions for themselves, and to express their own opinions, no matter how controversial, and without fear of reprisal. To promote this fundamental goal, Binghamton reaffirms its identity as an open community where freedom of expression is uncompromisingly protected. That's one of the better statements that a university has. We see some really tepid promises of free speech. It kind of says, our university protects freedom of speech, and that's it. But this is a pretty robust statement. It's a good one. But 77% of public colleges at the same time maintain unconstitutional speech codes. They restrict the freedom of speech. And I have endless stories to tell you, specific examples well documented on FIRE's website, but listen to these stories. In Georgia, a student was protesting the construction of 2 new parking garages on campus. He was an environmentalist, he still is. He thought that the 2 new parking garages would promote more use of cars, more driving on campus, more greenhouse gases, and hurt the environment. So he ran a postering campaign. He tried to persuade people on campus not to put the 2 parking garages up. The president of the university called him in, said, "What are you doing to my legacy?" Apparently his legacy was parking garages. And the student agreed, "Okay, I'll take some of the posters down." But later he put up a Facebook collage which said the President Zachariah Memorial Parking Garage, making fun of the statement that this had to do with his legacy. Well, the president took the word memorial as some kind of death threat and increased the security around his person and decided that the student was a clear and present danger to the campus and summarily, without any kind of hearing, expelled the student. He had slid a note under the student's door on the last day of his last exam saying, "You have been administratively withdrawn from the university." His lawsuit is pending, but I believe he's going to win that one. In Indiana, a student employee was reading a book. He was found guilty of racial harassment for reading this book. It's called Notre Dame versus the Klan. The book is an anti-Klan book. It's about how a bunch of Notre Dame students in a riot in the 1920s beat up some Klansmen. But the book also has on its cover pictures of Klansmen and burning crosses. And because of the cover of the book, this person was found guilty of racial harassment, judging a book by its cover in the worst way. In New Hampshire, a student was tired of waiting for the elevator to come. He lived, I suppose, several floors up. And in his dorm, he decided he would put up a poster saying, "Hey girls, you can lose your freshman 15 if you just take the stairs and the rest of us can get up the elevator." That's not something I would write. but it certainly protected speech. But the student was thrown out of his dorm, and he had to live in his car for several weeks while fire came to his rescue. Remember, this was November in New Hampshire. It was pretty cold, but he was thrown out of the dorm because he had violated the community's norms so seriously with this poster that this had to happen. During the election season in Illinois and at the University of Oklahoma, for instance, all faculty were told in Illinois during the election season that they could not attend any political rallies on campus, wear political buttons, or even have political bumper stickers on their cars. And at the University of Oklahoma, faculty, staff, and students were told that they couldn't even forward any political humor or commentary using the university's email system. At San Francisco State University, the college Republicans hosted an anti-terrorism rally in which they stepped on makeshift, by makeshift I mean they made them themselves, Hezbollah and Hamas flags. Obviously, it would get the people who like those organizations very upset. So a couple students complained, and the college Republicans at SFSU were put under investigation. Fire, again, as in many of these cases, intervened. The investigation was halted, but the interesting thing is that SFSU college Republicans then took the whole CSU system to court and managed to persuade the whole CSU system to change its unconstitutional speech code, at least some parts of it. In St. Louis, a student emailed his fellow classmates saying, I don't really feel like continuing this organic chemistry class. Why don't we just drop the class and take it later with a different professor? Or maybe we'll even take it at another school. It was a community college. The professor found out about this, and the student was placed on probation and banned from emailing his classmates ever again. At the University of Delaware, resident assistants, RAs, were required to report students to the authorities, and that meant the police, day or night, immediately, for, and I quote, any instance that is perceived by those involved as being racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, or otherwise oppressive. This was part of the escalation procedures at the University of Delaware. So the same level of urgency as a fire, drug overdose, or sexual assault was anything deemed by the people involved to be in any way oppressive. The University of Delaware also suspended a student pending psychiatric evaluation because of humor he wrote himself and published on his website and put on his dorm room door. I have another couple pages of examples, but I'll pass through them. Here's another interesting one. At Colorado College, 2 male students posted flyers as a parody of flyers of the gender studies interns on campus. The flyer of the gender studies interns was kind of tongue-in-cheek. It was called the Monthly Rag. And the 2 male students decided they would put up posters called the Monthly Bag. And it was about guy stuff. It was about what to do with your chainsaw, what to do if you're a battered man, this kind of thing. Well, unfortunately, that offended some people on campus. They had put these posters up anonymously. They had called themselves the Coalition of Some Dudes. So the president sent a kind of campus-wide email out saying, Coalition of Some Dudes, identify yourselves. And they did. And they were then subjected to a 3.5-hour interrogation session where they were asked questions like, so how many gender studies courses have you taken? And they ended up being found guilty of sexually related violence because they had mentioned chainsaws and sniper rifles on their poster. And apparently they had put feminists in fear for their life. All of these cases and more involve the rights of students, faculty, or staff on college campuses, public or private. There are hundreds more. And FIRE has been fighting these injustices now for 10 years. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, and sadly, the cases keep coming. I hope you can figure out from these examples that FIRE is completely nonpartisan. We'll defend you if you're pro-something, anti-something, or just want to put up a poster saying, I hate talking about this topic. We unite leaders in the fields of civil rights and civil liberties, scholars, journalists, and public intellectuals across the intellectual spheres of politics and ideology, all united on behalf of liberty. Liberty is a testimony to the strength and autonomy of human beings. Our liberties are ennobling, and liberties such as academic freedom are particularly essential and central to the modern university and the modern liberal arts college, especially in the United States. It has long been recognized, for instance, by the Supreme Court, that the university is, quote, peculiarly the marketplace of ideas. Hopefully you've heard that term before. The Supreme Court argued this in 1972, but you don't need the Supreme Court to tell you this. In recognition of that principle, Yale University in 1974 wrote a famous report named the Woodward Report, and I encourage everyone to read it. You might also see it under the name Report of the Committee on Freedom of Expression at Yale. It's a private university that stood up now 35 years ago in favor of freedom of expression. And let me just read you a few quotations from this report. The university must do everything possible to ensure within it the fullest degree of intellectual freedom. The history of intellectual growth and discovery clearly demonstrates the need for unfettered freedom, the right to think the unthinkable, discuss the unmentionable, and challenge the unchallengeable. The Woodward Report acknowledges that such freedom may at times make life uncomfortable in a small community like a college, but it concludes that free expression must nevertheless be protected for, quoting, "The results of free expression are to the general benefit in the long run, however unpleasant they may appear at the time." As the Woodward Report so eloquently states, to fulfill a university's primary purpose of discovering and disseminating knowledge by means of research and teaching, quote, "The free exchange of ideas is necessary, not only within its walls, but with the world beyond as well." And as the Supreme Court stated with enduring eloquence in a case in 1943 during World War II, West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, freedom to differ is not limited to things that do not matter much. That would be a mere shadow of freedom. The test of its substance is the right to differ as to things that touch the heart of the existing order. If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, that includes university administrators, I added that, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. What's fascinating about this case, 1943, it was Jehovah's Witnesses who didn't want to state the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. During World War II, the Supreme Court says, even in this time where you might think that, say, pro-Americanism is so important that we want to get everybody pledging to the flag, Supreme Court says, no, you have the right to dissent, and we can't force you to say or to pledge something that you don't believe. When a free speech advocate tells a government or a university in no uncertain terms what it may not do in restricting freedom of expression or freedom of conscience, for instance, it's because we believe in something positive that human beings and citizens can do. In FIRE's experience, universities tend to restrict freedom of expression when they fail to publicly acknowledge that negative feelings are a natural part of a fully engaged, valuable educational experience. Offense, confusion, embarrassment in learning that you've been wrong, discomfort in hearing your views challenged, vigorously challenged, being the subject of a parody or a satire, all of these feelings are a natural part of the vigorous discussion among free persons, especially in a marketplace of ideas. Such experiences happen regularly on a healthy university campus to faculty, university, and staff. And if you make it through 4 years of college without ever having been offended, you should ask for your money back. The university isn't doing its job. When you engage in the special marketplace of ideas at a liberal arts college or a research university, you're living your life in an especially exciting way, and you should make the most of it. But when a college tries to protect you from negative feelings or words, in the name of making you feel comfortable, or in the name of civility, the college is disrespecting your own maturity and autonomy. The college is telling you that you are so weak and disempowered that you can't handle the marketplace of ideas. But the more unsettling the challenge to your most deeply held beliefs and values, the more such a challenge bears on who you are in your own development and education as a person, the more educational it can be. A speech code is the opposite of free speech. It's a restriction on speech. Speech is not conduct, and I'm not violating anyone's rights if I say something that offends every person in this room, if I severely offend every person in this room. Now, if I do it to the point of actual harassment, where now you feel like you can't show your face on the university again, I've singled you out. Now, maybe I've harassed you, and that's not protected. And there are certain exceptions to freedom of speech that every university is bound by the law, such as harassment, not to protect. But the vast majority of speech is protected. Instead of establishing a speech code, a university should fashion a statement like BU's statement, consistent with our nation's best traditions. And instead of establishing a free speech zone where speech is free here on this little gazebo but not on the rest of campus, like some student organizations have told us exist on their campuses. The university should declare that free expression is welcomed everywhere on campus, that the university itself is a free speech zone within certain limits, like the classroom where the professor gets to say what can be said, when, and how. But so instead of hearkening back to the Victorian era of the 1900s and saying that civility is one of the university's highest values, maybe the university should declare that the diversity of its faculty and students includes such a diversity of ideas that civility is the last thing it wants on campus. It's willing to risk discomfort, the discomfort of everyone on campus, for the sake of intellectual values like wisdom or truth, or academic freedom at least. Now this brings me to the case of Andre Massena here at Binghamton. I don't know how many of you know his story, but I'll tell most of it. He's a graduate student here in the Department of Social Work, and he's waived his right to privacy so that I could tell you his story. Last August, he put up posters on campus. It's another postering case, claiming that a woman and her children had been unjustly evicted from their home by the Binghamton Housing Authority, or BHA. Using the pseudonym Justice Speaks, the poster called the BHA inhumane. The poster pointed out that the BHA's executive director, David Tannenhouse, is an adjunct professor in BU's Department of Social Work. The poster encouraged readers to call the department, quote, to let them know what you think. Now, the student chose anonymity. He used the pseudonym Justice Speaks, so he chose pseudonymity. He chose this after hearing stories from other students in his own department about students being unjustly advanced, which means expelled. It's kind of doublespeak, I think, advanced from the program. When he was interrogated about the posters, he didn't explicitly invoke his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. He didn't think he had done anything wrong anyway, but he exercised his right to anonymous speech, and he declined to acknowledge that he had put up the posters. This decision itself was cited in the department as the official reason for the punishment that came next. But when you listen to what comes next, it will become painfully clear to you that he was being punished for the poster, not for refusing to acknowledge that he had put up the poster. All you have to do is look at the written plan that he received from his department a week later. This was last September. The plan failed to specify any alleged violations, which I guess they told him orally, but it nevertheless assigned him shockingly harsh and unconstitutional requirements to complete in order to continue in his program. He was required to leave the university for 2 semesters. His return was contingent on departmental approval. He was required to present a formal statement to university and governmental officials retracting his opinions, here's the unconstitutional part, to submit formal apologies to a pre-approved list of people as evaluated by Professors Laura Bronstein, the department chair, and Diane Weiner, another professor in the department, and to complete a critical reflection paper of 10 to 12 pages on the topic of ethics and social work. Now, I think you'll be amazed to hear in detail how severe was the disrespect for free speech in this document. I've got to quote you almost the whole document. There's 8 parts to this. 1, Mr. Massena will withdraw from all MSW courses for which he is enrolled for the fall term of 2008. He will take a 2-semester leave of absence from the MSW program. Remember, this is all about a poster, but they said it was about him failing to acknowledge that he had put up the poster. In order to reflect upon his readiness to enter the field of social work as a professional practitioner, given his actions during late August 2008 and the likely as well as possible consequences, both immediate and long-term, of his actions, to various individuals, the Department of Social Work, Binghamton University, the greater Binghamton community, and his own professional development. It's a long sentence, I won't read it again, but you can go to FIRE's website and see the whole document. 2, Mr. Massena's leave of absence will be effective immediately. His eligibility to advance in the MSW program is dependent initially upon his satisfactory completion of each facet of this written plan. The satisfactory completion of this plan does not guarantee his continuance in the program. 3, Mr. Massena will review the entire MSW student handbook. I wonder how many students have read your own student handbook here. I recommend that you do it to preserve your own rights, but they're giving this to him as a punishment, including the advancement policy and the social work contract that he signed upon admission, and he will inform Dr. Bronstein, either via email or in person, that he has reviewed these materials thoroughly and that he understands the seriousness of his actions during late August 2008. 4, a formal apology in writing and or verbally will be made to all parties concerned. Dr. Bronstein and Dr. Weiner will discuss this list with Mr. Massena to make sure it is comprehensive. A copy of the written apology statements will be given to Dr. Bronstein by Mr. Massena and will be placed in his confidential student file along with the other materials related to this case. 5, a formal statement of retraction will be written to be signed and dated by him and forwarded to the president of Binghamton University, the Binghamton University Department of Social Work, and the Binghamton Housing Authority, indicating, now this is coerced speech. They're telling him what he must do, indicating that he does not agree with and regrets the sentiments expressed in the following statement, which he promoted initially by distributing posters/leaflets at the University Downtown Center, which said, quote, "We will in no way, shape, or form apologize for any harm or inconvenience this poster may cause Binghamton Housing Authority or Binghamton University and their affiliates." So they're requiring him to apologize, requiring him to retract his statement saying he wouldn't apologize, and not only that, indicating that he no longer agrees with his former statement. 6, Mr. Massena will make every effort possible and will inform Professors Bronstein and Weiner of his efforts to end the process whereby students, service providers, and community members approach the Department of Social Work in an effort to alleviate, quote, wrong they may see as occurring at the Binghamton Housing Authority. 7, Mr. Massena will acknowledge verbally to Dr. Bronstein and Dr. Weiner that he understands that he is entitled to his opinions and that taking responsibility for the harm that his actions have and may have caused is not the same as having these opinions. Kind of a bone to freedom of speech thrown in there. Number 8, by May 8th, 2009, this is the 10 to 12 page paper where they require that what the topic is and that he has to use as the foundational premise of his paper a scholarly essay by one Mr. Olson. Now, any reasonable person, I hope everyone in this room, would see that these requirements were outrageous. They focused on the content and the embarrassing effects of the posters, and they were designed to completely shut down one of their own students who had embarrassed the department. The department was demanding no less than abject groveling from one of its own students. Yet even these humiliating, disproportionate, and inappropriate punishments were not sufficient for the Department of Social Work. Massena appealed his punishment to 2 appeals committees. When his second appeal reached the College of Community and Public Affairs, Ethics and Integrity Committee, he found that Professor Bronstein no longer wanted him suspended, she wanted him expelled. She had submitted 50 pages of materials with entirely new allegations, which, by the way, you're not allowed to do in appeals. That's a violation of your due process rights. But she concluded that he now needed to be expelled because of all of these new allegations. And even other Binghamton University officials outside the Department of Social Work, and I believe a number of them within it, who were not as feeling as free to speak out, found this response ridiculous, ordered that the scope of the hearing be reduced to something like the original charges, at least on the appeal, and that's what happened. I've heard the tape of the hearing. A number of witnesses claimed that the tape of the hearing was altered. I can't tell that myself, but I'm told that the tape of the hearing is being checked out, and we'll know soon whether or not that injustice happened or not. Given the treatment of the students so far, I think it's at least worth investigating. Now, my organization wrote BU's president on October 29th about what was going on. We insisted that BU acknowledge the right of its students to freely criticize public officials, to freely criticize entities such as the BHA, and even Binghamton University itself, without punishment and without roundabout allegations intended to punish him by other means. Now, the good news in his case, like almost all of the cases that we take up, is that when the violations are exposed by fire, Justice Louise Brandeis said sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. What that means is once you shine the light of justice on the school's injustices, the school backs down. And BU did back down in this case. The school won't dare to do in public what it tries to get away with in private. no school has ever responded to a letter from Fire saying, oh, we have these promises of free speech, but we don't really mean them. We'll just remove those from the Code of Student Conduct, and we have some other values that we value so much more that, yeah, that was just a mistake. We'll remove that free speech stuff. No, the school says, yes, we value freedom of speech. We're going to make it right. Almost every time. So in the case here at hand, shortly after his hearing, he got a one-sentence email exonerating him. Well, it didn't actually exonerate him. This is what the one-sentence line said from Professor Bronstein. Due to procedural misunderstandings, the case pertaining to you is no longer being pursued. That was it. That's all he got. Although that's not all that he got, because now there are allegations of grade retaliation from a couple of his professors at least. I encourage you to read about it in this current issue of the Binghamton Review. And here's how writer Randall Meyer, I think he's class of 11, tells the story. And I've heard these allegations too, and there are witnesses and there's even some documentary evidence supporting this. After the charges were dropped, many hoped that the troubles would end. However, various professors in the MSW department have been retaliating against Andre for overcoming their attempts to challenge his speech rights. Two professors, Nancy Frank and Deborah Oliver, have distinctly and reprehensibly made outrageous strides in order to fail Andre in their classes. Now, here's the beauty of freedom of the press. I've named a couple professors by name. They may or may not be here to defend themselves, but they have every right to challenge these allegations and to say, no, that's not what I did. But the beauty of freedom of the press is somebody can at least say, I really honestly believe this is the case. Come defend yourself and bring it to public attention. So these are the allegations. I'm not saying they're true, but I think they're definitely worth investigating. And in fact, Fire is investigating them. Professor Frank used the class participation part of the grade to fail Andre. She claimed that Andre did not participate, slept in class, etc. Normally, this would justify giving a lower score to a student. The problem is that these claims appear to be fabricated. According to several classmates of Andre, he regularly participated in class, asked insightful questions, and never fell asleep in class. According to Massena and several of his classmates, Professor Oliver began ignoring Andre in class and outside of class. A classmate of Andre said it best, quote, I noticed this during the last 3 or 4 classes. Although Andre continued to raise his hand in order to participate in class, Professor Oliver no longer called on him. It was obvious that she was purposely avoiding calling on him. It was also obvious, based on comments that I overheard in class, that other students in the class noticed the drastic change in the way that Professor Oliver behaved toward Andre. And there's more to these allegations too. Read them if you like in the Binghamton Review. See what is being alleged here. It's pretty serious, and it's the subject of some grade disputes by Massena, and I hope they are taken seriously and investigated with all the seriousness that they deserve. One more, Professor Oliver's professional misconduct. Again, this is according to Randall Meyer and the witnesses and the student himself. Before the free speech incident, Andre received no grade below 90 on any paper for her. However, his final paper was graded a 28. I don't know who gets a 28 on a paper in a social work department class. Sounds pretty suspicious to me. Now, maybe you're thinking, could this be true? Could the Department of Social Work really be so corrupt? Could it really have this many bad apples in it? So many, not bad apples, but really rotten apples? Unfortunately, it seems that the answer is yes, and it's not the first Department of Social Work that has been this bad. Let me tell you the story now of Emily Brooker. Brooker was a social work student at Missouri State University. One of her professors required that every student in the class write a personal letter to the Missouri legislature to advocate for homosexual foster parenting and adoption. She didn't want to advocate for it. She had the opposite position, but you only got credit if you wrote the pro letter and not if you wrote the anti letter. She said, I don't want to write it. And you weren't allowed to sign your name to the opposite position. Everybody had to sign their name and say, I am in favor of this legislation. Coerced speech, again, whether you agree with this issue or not, hopefully you agree, you can't make every student in the class take a position on something that's controversial. It's one of the most profound forms of disrespect for individual conscience. She resisted. She was able to write her own letter, but she was then subjected to level 3 grievance by her own department. It's the highest level of grievance. She was accused of violating the standards of essential functioning, but I'm not quite sure what that means because of her resistance to that requirement. She was subjected to a 2.5-hour interrogation by the social work faculty and was required to submit to monitoring in order to be allowed to graduate. She also, by the way, took the social work department to court. The Alliance Defense Fund filed suit on her behalf. They won a really good settlement. The student, she was in a bachelor's social work program. She got a free ride to the graduate department of her choice that she could get into. That was part of the settlement. Also, what happened at Missouri State, the school launched an independent investigation of the social work department. The report is scathing. It cites ideological coercion on the part of the faculty against dissenting students and the chilling effect of such actions and policies on the school's intellectual atmosphere. Here's how the report describes the academic environment at Missouri State at the time. Many students and faculty stated a fear of voicing differing opinions from the instructor or colleague. This was particularly true regarding spiritual and religious matters. Students voiced fears about questioning faculty regarding assignments or expectations. In fact, the word bullying was used by both students and faculty to characterize specific faculty members. It appears that faculty have no history of intellectual discussion or debate. That's pretty damning. Rather, differing opinions are taken personally and often result in inappropriate discourse. There's an atmosphere where the social work code of ethics is used to coerce students into certain belief systems regarding social work practice and the social work profession. This represents a distorted use of the social work code of ethics in that the code of ethics articulates that social workers should respect the values and beliefs of others. Now you should know that the American Council of Trustees and Alumni has written the entire SUNY Board of Trustees about Binghamton University's Department of Social Work, asking the trustees to initiate a similar review of BU's department here. Sounds like a good idea to me. Sad to say, Binghamton and Missouri State do not have the only social work programs where students are apparently forced to have a certain politicized point of view in order to succeed in the program. These two cases might be the most extreme, but the National Council on Social Work Education, or CSWE, has set up a system of ideological conformity for the entire field of social work. For the details, let me refer you to a report issued last year from the National Association of Scholars, nas.org. It's on their website. It's called The Scandal of Social Work Education. CSWE maintains a set of official standards on the basis of which it decides whether or not to accredit social work programs. The standards require that accredited programs, quote, integrate social and economic justice content grounded in an understanding of distributive justice, human and civil rights, and the global interconnections of oppression. Actually, a lot of these words are pretty general and could go in any direction, except that it's an understanding of distributive justice, human and civil rights, and the global interconnections of oppression. And so many schools of social work take this in a very specific politicized way. They require that graduates demonstrate the ability to understand the forms and mechanisms of oppression and discrimination and apply strategies of advocacy and social change that advance social and economic justice. Now, the word justice is, a really slippery term, right? It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I hope that the problem to you here is kind of obvious. Words like social justice and economic justice are so vague and politically loaded in practice that for CSWE to tell everyone else that they have to understand justice in terms of distributive justice and the global interconnections of oppression, that they're actually violating the freedom of conscience of students who just want a social work degree. Not only that, the standards force schools to evaluate prospective social workers based on their commitment to such ideals. Now, it's really interesting and ironic that here at BU, Andre Massena was doing just the kind of advocacy that CSWE would hope that he would do. He's advocating for social justice, except that he's getting in trouble for it because he advocated against the wrong folks in his own department. Now, what's wrong in the culture of the college campus today? Why is there so little regard for individual rights in colleges and universities, not just in social work departments, and not all departments, but at least some of them, and on 77% of university campuses, public university campuses, the places where free expression should be most free? Why does it take outside organizations like FIRE to intervene time after time to educate college administrators about the basic rights of citizens and even non-citizens on campus? Let me quickly offer 3 reasons to conclude. First, some people simply have not been educated or empowered to know how to react responsibly when they feel offended. Second, some people intend to act responsibly, but they make a fundamental mistake. And third, some people intend to act responsibly and they have good intentions, but they know very well what they are doing when they choose to repress expression on a college campus. So first, those who don't really know how to react responsibly when they hear something that offends them. These are the people who steal newspapers or tear down posters or try to expel somebody who they disagree with or who embarrasses them. These are vigilantes. They want to take matters into their own hands and use the power they have or the power of the state to punish. Now, they do have it partly right. The best response to speech you find offensive is to confront it, to fight back. But you don't confront it with force, you confront it with more speech. Now, some people might say they don't feel empowered to fight speech with more speech. I understand that. They might blame the campus climate or their own histories of feeling oppressed or being a member of a historically oppressed group from their perspective. But look, if a wide variety of student organizations on campus have a voice and feel empowered and are putting out publications, and if there's resources all over campus for being empowered, and Andre Massena, after everything that's happened to him, still feels empowered enough to put posters up all over campus and continue to fight his battle, everybody on campus is empowered enough to fight speech with more speech. And if you really are in some way still feeling disempowered to the degree that you just can't do it, go to some of those resources and get empowered so that you can. That's part of the educational mission, hopefully at a great school like BU, so that students will leave BU being able to fight speech with more speech. Now, second, those who intend to act responsibly, but they make a fundamental mistake in their response. Their mistake is that they rely on the power of the school or the government to enforce social norms, which should be enforced by the community itself. For instance, if I say something that's incredibly offensive to everyone in this room, there are a number of things that can happen to me without BU trying to get me on harassment or the police coming in and arresting me. You can publish in the newspaper, Adam Kissel said this very offensive thing. He should be shamed and embarrassed. And if I deserve to be, then if I'm an ethical person, I would say, yeah, I made a mistake. I said the wrong thing. You can refuse to clap at the end. You can frown. Sometimes it's okay to stand up and walk out of the room, or shout me down for maybe 5 seconds. Maybe a minute's worth of disruption counts as enough disruption before somebody should throw you out. Other things that could happen is the TV stations and the newspapers that are covering this could publish opposing views. If I work somewhere, maybe I could get fired. You can refuse to sit with me at the lunch table. I'm going to get the message really fast that I've offended the community's values. And that's going to be a lot more effective than if somebody calls on BU to put a letter in my file saying Adam Kissel said an offensive thing. So keep that in mind. When you encounter something that's really offensive to the community, you're a part of the community and you need to stand up and say, hey, these are not the kinds of words we like to hear. We are fighting back. Don't call on BU to punish something that the community can adequately and even more effectively punish on its own. Now, third, there's a group of people who intend to act responsibly. They mean well, and they know very well what they're doing, and they're choosing to suppress speech on a college campus. These are the people who are not content to let social consequences take their course. They want to control the campus. They want to change the campus climate. They want to force it to be different than what it is. And again, they have good intentions. Their goal is to make society better. But they repress speech in the name of their own vision of the good society. They're the true believers. They're the evangelists. They think they know the difference between good and bad, between the noble and the base. They want to change what people believe, and somehow they think they should do it by changing what people say. That's one thing I don't really understand about the speech police. I feel like they have it backwards. You should change what people believe through persuasion and argument, and that'll change what they say. Don't do it backwards. The censors unfortunately take it so much further than that. When they encounter speech that doesn't fit their ideological views of the good society, they feel perfectly justified to stamp it out because it's the antithesis of the good society. They'll punish, they'll shame, they'll force the alleged perpetrators to endure a shaming session so that everyone on campus will know this is going to happen to you if you step out of line, if you cross the speech police, and it chills expression on campus and makes the campus worse rather than better. If someone is, say, a racist on campus, you want to know who they are. You don't want them to kind of go underground. You want to know who they are so that you can pay attention to them. The result of censorship is just the opposite, often, of what the censors want. If you ban the language that a sexist pig wants to use, he goes back to the pig pen with the other pigs. He just doesn't come out. So you're not actually changing him. You're not cleaning up his act or his language. He just goes somewhere else and says the things that he wants to say to his friends. You're not engaging him in dialogue. If you force him to not say the things that he really believes, you're sending him away. You're not changing him. So the answer is education, not repression, certainly not mandatory apologies and mandatory repudiation of your views. If senior administrators on campus are not defending and promoting individual rights on campus, they're probably not doing their jobs. Faculty, students, and staff all have different rights and responsibilities on a college campus, and I believe it is vital to show the world that at American colleges and universities, free expression is not a myth, not a broken promise. Thanks.
My name is Margaret Hendricks, and I used to be teaching here at the School of Management, and I left December 2007. And my first question for you is, have you any knowledge documentation, just what happens afterwards, like how does a school or a university move forward? Because I'm assuming that there will be a lot of angry faculty, angry administrators that feel humiliated, that may not necessarily admit it. And so do you have any suggestions or experiences on what can be done to kind of move forward in a way that the whole university heals and becomes better?
Good, that's a wonderful question. There are a few things that can happen. For one thing, if you've done the wrong thing and you've been shamed for it, part of the solution is for you to engage in some personal introspection and figure out why it was that you thought you were justified in doing the bad thing. So that kind of healing kind of has to happen individually. But collectively, an interesting thing that happened recently at TAMU, Texas A&M, they held a conference on freedom of speech so that people could talk about, it was actually something that the Young Conservatives of Texas had done. They had done an anti-Obama egg toss. So you're throwing eggs at a picture of, I think then candidate Obama. And the idea was throw away your nest egg or something. And then some students decided that they didn't like this protest, and they picked up some of the eggs and they started throwing them at the Young Conservatives of Texas, right? So what the campus administration did is they said, okay, look, let's have a conference on freedom of speech. What kinds of things should you be allowed to do in protest if you don't like a position of, throwing eggs is not one of them. So they had an outsider come in and gave out 500 of FIRE's guides to free expression on campus and held seminars for students to really talk about, so what kind of lines are there? Where should we draw the lines? What should we tolerate? And what can we do short of bringing in the university administration to fight speech we don't like? So it gives everybody a chance to kind of talk it out and kind of empowers people to see what they should do next time. When the bad thing has happened on a campus and people have been shamed, there's not a lot you can do to unshame them, but you can look forward. You can revise the speech code so it doesn't happen again. A case at Michigan State that I didn't mention, a student emailed about 8% of the faculty about a campus issue. She was found guilty as a spammer, even though she had carefully selected which faculty members to write, the ones who had the best chance of doing something about this policy. And she, after FIRE intervened and she was on appeal, she was basically found innocent, or they dropped the charge. They seldom find you innocent, they just drop the charges, they just kind of disappear. But the next thing that happened was the school also said, Michigan State, we're never going to prosecute another student under this anti-spam policy for doing the kind of thing that this student did. So it's a way for all people who are in this kind of case to move forward knowing that now they have freedom of speech again in this area. Now the problem is that Michigan State hasn't actually told the rest of campus yet that they're no longer enforcing the anti-spam policy. We're going to have to do it for them with like adding the student paper. But at least in private, MSU has said, we're not going to enforce this policy anymore. So one way of moving forward is for the school to say, okay, we're going to actually change the policy under which somebody was unconstitutionally had their rights infringed.
Last year, BU put in a policy stating that a student has to exit his dorm residence at the compulsion of a university official. I was wondering if you knew of any other schools that went this far to infringe on student rights in their code of conduct as far as due process rights.
I'm told that this is a policy that has been condemned by the Student Association and by other students around campus. First of all, FIRE deals mostly with freedom of speech, First Amendment rights, not as much with due process in terms of the 5th and 14th Amendments, and even less with unreasonable search and seizure. So it's not really within our mission. But we have taken a look at it, and it really is constitutionally suspect. It definitely bears further scrutiny. I personally don't know of any other school that has this policy. Again, I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm not the one at FIRE who reads through hundreds of student codes of student conduct every year. We do have somebody on staff who does that and rates schools based on the level of likely or actual violations of student rights that are in these codes of student conduct. I'm not the one who does it, but I'll say that if you get summoned by someone to come out of your room and then you come out, you do have the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, right? You can say, I have now come out, you have summoned me out, but I will not incriminate myself. May I go back in my room now? I don't know, maybe that's the best you can do until the policy is changed. But there's no school I know that does this. Now, I remember hearing a couple years ago, 3 years ago now, that the University of Delaware would have police officers walk through the halls kind of trolling for violations. And this was considered a real invasion of the students' privacy by the students. Whether or not it really was a violation, I don't know. I mean, I think the Binghamton Review article on this policy kind of has it right, that you should try to compare it with what the police could do to any citizen. You know, should the police be able to knock on your door and say, we think, you know, a crime might be going on at in your house there, would you please come out? Now, if the city of Binghamton can do that to you, then why can't the school also do it to you in your dorm? But if the city can't do it to you, then why should Binghamton University be allowed to do it? I think it does a matter of basic fairness. The question is, should Binghamton University be setting a higher standard of student rights, setting an example for the community, or should it be setting a lower standard? I think it should be setting a higher standard, but that's up to BU within the law.
My name is Amanda Jones, and I'm a social work graduate. And an interesting thing about Andre's case is that there were 2 students who sent out a petition the very end of the semester before, in which many of us signed it against David Tannenhouse becoming a professor. And we were asked individually by the director of our program to take our names off, and specifically threatened, many, at least I was, specifically threatened that, well, maybe you won't be able to take that class at all if David Tannenhouse is not a professor. And I said, well, I won't take it then. I'll take it the next year. And my concern as an alumni now, as of today, I got my diploma. I have a concern because the social work program, to me, has many ideals. And I feel like it could reach those ideals if we weeded out some professors who I think are shady. And I actually think the director is a good director. But I think that there's some really horrible things that are going on there. And I look to outside agencies and outside influences to be able to see what we could do as alumni and how to help current students like Andre to not have this happen again. I was a victim of advancement, like I told you, but I know at least 3 other students who also were victims of the advancement policy. And some people left. Some people took entire years over again. And Andre, as of today, was the only person who spoke up. And that's because of fear. People don't want to, I didn't want to take another year over again. I don't have $10,000 to throw away. He was the only person who basically had the balls to stand up. and I stand up today. That's about as much as I can do.
Thank you for standing up. And I would say that other alumni like you need to tell their stories about the department. They may or may not be, as you remember them, but the sooner you tell them, the closer they're, hopefully they'll be to what actually happened. Get those to the boss of the Department of Social Work, whichever dean it would be. And then strongly call, like I am now calling, and like the American Council of Trustees and Alumni has called, for an independent review of the department. Okay. Now, there are a number of things that departments will do to a professor they don't like. Some of them are acceptable and some of them are unacceptable. If somebody is a bad teacher, you can reassign them so that they only do research and they don't teach. Or if they're a bad researcher, you give them lots of courses to teach and you use their talents in a different way. So if somebody just really can't be trusted with students, you just don't give them classes anymore. Now, if you're doing that to punish them for views that they're asserting in the classroom that you don't like, then that professor comes to fire and we defend that professor. So if a number of students had come to us saying, we don't like Professor Tannenhouse, we think he should be fired because we don't like his views, and then the social work department did something about it, then we would be defending Professor Tannenhouse because he's being attacked for his views. So, we'll defend a professor, we'll defend a student. And so if there are professors who, as you say, who basically need to be reassigned or fired or somehow bought out, I would just encourage that process to be done with all due process for the professors themselves. So that, if they're in the habit of violating student rights, for instance, now that's a real ground on which you could even maybe terminate someone. But if they're just trying to enforce, their own view and values that they have in a responsible way, then, what they're doing is protected too.
Hello again. I think that Amanda actually brought up, or indirectly, if she did not do it directly, an important point. At least something I started thinking about, that it may not be just the Department of Social Work, that they may actually really have been coerced in doing some of the things they did. And that
some people are saying that, and it's because of the position of Tannenhouse in the community, and it's because of the relationship of the university and the city. Now, as an outsider, I don't really have a way of judging that. But those who live in the city and who do have a way of judging that, and those who are investigative reporters, should do the best they can to kind of untangle some of those lines of influence and kind of see.
And my question on how does FIRE or the Association of Alumni work with actually the administrative structure of the university? Because the problem may be really just in the office of the president and the office of the provost. And I'm not implying that they're bad people, it just may be that they're using some management rule that is kind of arcane or a way of making decisions that just doesn't make sense anymore. And so then the question is how can students or anyone that is feeling to be a stakeholder in this problem just approach directly the administration of the university as opposed to the individual department? Yeah.
Sure. You're asking a hard management question. Everybody has a boss. The president has a boss, the trustees, and the trustees have a boss. They boss themselves. And faculty members have a chair, and the chair has a dean. So you kind of have to look at who the bad apple is and go to that person or that organization's boss and say, look, here's the thing that's happening, fix it. Now, you also go to that person themselves first, and that's kind of a matter of courtesy, right? You say, hey, president, or hey, provost, here's the management structure that I think you might be employing, which is causing problems down the line. Why don't you fix it? Now, that's not for FIRE really to do. All we'll do on that level is we'll send the president a letter saying, look, you have a speech code that's violating student rights. It's actually being used against students unconstitutionally. This opens your school up to legal liability. This opens your school up to legal challenges, lots of embarrassment, lots of money lost. We think you should probably fix it now rather than later. In a lot of cases, the school does fix it. We'll hear back from the university attorney saying, yeah, I'm going to make sure the president fixes it. Because sometimes the boss of the president is the university council.
I was wondering about FIRE's rating of colleges and where Binghamton University stacks up compared to other schools.
We rate hundreds of schools every year. We give them either a red light, a yellow light, or a green light based on whether or not they have policies that restrict student speech. A green light means you have no policies that we could find that restrict student speech. A red light is the worst. It means you have at least one policy that clearly and substantially, which means basically unconstitutionally, you can be sued for it, restricts student speech. And Binghamton University, like a number of schools, is in the middle. It gets a yellow light because it has policies that could be used to punish student speech, depends how they're applied. So what a red light school has, which a yellow light doesn't, is a policy that's so bad that on paper it could be challenged in court even if it's never used against a student. It's that bad. It chills speech on campus because people don't say things knowing that they could be prosecuted. So BU has no red light policies. It only has yellow light policies. So so basically you're in the middle. If 77% of public schools have a red light and a very small percentage have a green light, it puts you in the top, 23%.
I noted the whole SUNY system when I several months ago when I first began following Andre's case and then looking at the FIRE website, and I noted that Binghamton University is the only New York public university that does have a yellow. The rest have reds. And in view of what was going on here, I thought it I wondered if maybe the policies in practice rather than the policies that are on paper might be a better basis for your rating system.
Well, the rating system is meant for prospective students and for students on campus to know where their school stacks up. And if there's a habit that a yellow light school makes of actually enforcing its policies in a red light kind of way, then I think we do convert that yellow light to a red light. Now, here in BU's case, we advocated for the students' rights. We won, as we usually do. The school backed down, and BU kind of preserved its yellow light rating for now. Now, if a number of social work students come back up to us and say, well, the Department of Social Work is a red light department, then we have to think again. Now, I'm told that there are some revisions pending to the Code of Student Conduct that might even be able to get BU into the green light category, but they may or may not be enough to get us there. But we would love to work with BU and any other school to help you get from yellow to green, and then it becomes a matter of individual rogue professors and departments that need to get into line with the rest of the university. And I call on the central administration of BU, if you really value freedom of speech, and if the rest of your university is doing really well, find a way to get those other departments that are red light departments back up to yellow and into green.
In fact, I recall reading a letter on your site saying, hey, Binghamton, you're so close, why don't you just make yourself green, But in coming back to the last question I asked in which you answered, then there is, based on the unresolved issues of what happened after your victory, there is the possibility.
For sure there is.
Of revising.
For instance, the student filed a number of grievances against a number of professors, kind of both academic and non-academic. Now, if BU takes those grievances seriously and appropriately investigates them and says, well, these have merit, these don't, and decides what should happen next, in a fair way, then that's what a good university would do. If BU says, well, we don't like this student anymore, he's embarrassed us too much, he's just making too much trouble for us, and just throws out the grievances and doesn't give him due process for them, well, that's an example of a red light school, not giving due process where process is due. So, again, I have to talk about this kind of thing with my colleagues, but it's a good chance that because of things like that, BU would go from yellow to red. even if it doesn't have any policies on the books, if it has a consistent pattern of violating students' rights.
Has that ever happened to a university?
I'll have to find out.
A rating being given not by what they profess, but what they do?
Well, that's how some yellow light schools do become red, and I would need to find out how often we've done that from the person on staff who does it. But it's pretty unusual because usually the school does back down. Schools don't like being embarrassed. They don't like losing donations. They don't like being shamed in the press. And they don't like being known as a school that violates student rights, which fewer people apply. We have actually kind of a category. It's not part of the rating system, but we call it the red alert list, which has 5 schools on it. These are schools where we say to prospective students, you should think twice about going to this school because it violates students' rights so badly and is unrepentant about it, it will violate your rights again if you do a similar thing. Brandeis University, Johns Hopkins, Colorado College, Michigan State, until it revises this spam policy. We used to have Valdosta State on there. But this is a small, select group of the worst of the worst. And if a school persists in being as bad to other students as it treated Massena, BU could find itself on the red alert list. And then we put a full-page ad every year in U.S. News and World Report right next to the rankings saying, hey, prospective students, avoid these schools if you value your rights. It costs some money, but it's worth getting that message out.
These grievances, as of the last I've heard, there's been pretty much a zero response.
I think it's been maybe, 3 weeks or so since then. Universities are busy places and there was the holidays and stuff. So I don't know what counts as due process for the hearing of grievances. I mean, there's not really good case law on how long it should take to get these grievances going. But a student does have a reasonable expectation of, due diligence, especially if the allegations are severe enough that, there could be students punished for their own grades this semester. I would think that whoever's in charge should be not delaying, especially because the more the outrage is an illegal activity, if it actually turns out to be illegal retaliation adds up, the worse it's going to be for the school and when worse things start to happen. That's all I can say right now.
One issue is a question of policies regarding what happens to an incomplete. You're
Yes.
aware of that?
One of the issues here, and this is kind of inside baseball for those who don't really know the ins and outs of the case, in one situation, the student got an incomplete for a course and thought he was going to be able to have a certain amount of time to complete it for a grade. The policy is at best ambiguous on whether if you then later don't turn in the assignment after all, if you automatically get an F, or if you can kind of say, I'm now withdrawing from the course, now that even though the course is over and I have an incomplete, I just want to get a W. Looking at the documents that I've seen so far, it's at best ambiguous whether the professor really has discretion to then just fail the student or not. I think it's pretty suspicious that in this case, the professor just chose to fail the student. But this is not really for a public discussion. It's kind of
in the emails I get from Andre.
Yeah. Maybe you could introduce yourself.
My name is Richard Mallinson, and I know Andre through 2 organizations. I met him first as he was an intern at Citizen Action, and after I joined the NAACP, he started coming to the weekly legal redress committee meetings, and he did quite a bit of work talking to people in the county prison and reporting to us and others of us seeing,
It's interesting how many times the person who's prosecuted has a really interesting and noble resume. Like the guy who was expelled from Valdosta State in Georgia, he was a paramedic who go around in ambulances and save people's lives, and he tries to advocate against parking garages and he gets expelled. So, unfortunately, and the MSU student was a student government leader. The almost the top of the student government, you're a spammer. You could be suspended for being a spammer. So we do see all kinds of, I guess you'd say, high quality engaged people in their communities being the ones who actually are the kinds of people who speak out, and then they're the kinds of people who get shut down by unscrupulous administrators, or in this case, faculty members.
According to Andre, he finds the only sources he was been able to get an answer from say that an incomplete automatically goes to a W, a withdrawal. And the professor says, oh, but there's another policy that lets me fail you. And he's never been shown where that's, written down.
Right. So the documents that I've seen suggest that, that it's a W. The professor says he was told, I think by the registrar, that he has the discretion to give an F if he wants. I don't know where it says that the professor has that discretion. The document that I saw says that it becomes a W, but it also says that it becomes a W after 6 months, but it hasn't been 6 months, and the student, so it's not an open and shut case to me. It's definitely worth investigating. It's something that among the other grade disputes we're taking a look at.
That would suggest that it isn't even resolved, and it's assumed that he is eventually going to submit the work to complete the course.
Right.
With up to 6 months if they don't.
Yep. Now, when I was in college, the way I got extensions was the professor would say, I'll give you a day or I'll give you a week. And even if there's a policy on the books that says, it could be up to 6 months, basically you've got to do it in the day or the week. So, so you kind of have to qualify for extensions up to the 6 months. Now, I don't want to really trouble the whole group here with this part of the story, but it's definitely something that FIRE continues to pay attention to.
So can a university deem a poster or an email inappropriate or something like that, if it's not really inappropriate?
Great question.
In usuals, but if they say, oh, this poster's inappropriate, we don't want this in our residence hall, by our cafeterias or something like that.
Oh, great question. The university is an actor in its own right. It has its own freedom of speech and its own institutional academic freedom, right? So if somebody puts up a poster that the president or some administrator strongly doesn't like, the university can say, this is inappropriate, we don't like this kind of thing here on our campus. But what the university also should do in almost the same breath is say, but we will not prosecute it, right? There's a big difference between saying, this is inappropriate, we don't like it, and this is so inappropriate we have to punish it, right? So the institution can kind of keep asserting its own values without actually punishing and violating the freedom of speech.
So they could basically say we have to take a poster down or something?
No, because now that's a censorship action, right? So what the university can do is fight speech with more speech. The university, if they wanted, could put a front page ad in its own publication, university publication, saying, we hate posters like this, and have a little picture of the poster. And we condemn all students who, but basically should also say, but we would never prosecute such a thing because we value that student's right to say the very offensive thing. Do you see?
So if somebody writes because there was a few one of the situations where there was a poster up about the Sodexo employees and not having health care, and supposedly the university did not like this and all that type of thing. So what is the course of action if somebody says, we don't like you have to take all these posters down, that type of thing? Fire, I guess?
Yep. Yeah, so this is about being proactive. This is the part of the talk that we should spend a little bit of time on. How can you be proactive about your rights? One is know what they are. Know that if the university censors you, that's a violation of your speech rights. The university can't make you take down a poster which is posted in a place where other posters are allowed to be put up. Now, it can make you take down a poster that you put over there because you're not really allowed to put any posters up there, right? It can make you take down a poster if it has extreme obscenity on it, right? But there are very limited exceptions for the university being allowed to make you take down a poster. Objecting to the level of health benefits of employees comes nowhere close. Nowhere close. Now, if you're a university employee and you're putting up those posters, your rights are very different. The rights of staff and the rights of students are very, very different. So my advice to you, if you're a staff member, is get a student to write the poster and put it up, and don't let them know that you're involved. Because the employee relationship offers much fewer rights. But a student has all the rights of a citizen. You don't lose your rights just because you come onto campus. If the government couldn't do it to you, the school can't do it to you. Because the school is the government.
I work also with the local NAACP Legal Redress Committee on the case of the individual to whom you referred much of this discussion this evening. What I wanted to get some feedback on was, to what extent is the fact that this is a public tax-supported institution bear on these issues? For example, one of the things I find a great deal of irony on is that the UUP would be absolutely intolerant of some of the egregious abuses of rights that are imposed on students by them if they were imposed on faculty. They wouldn't stand for this nonsense for a minute. UUP is United University Professors, the faculty union. The other irony, and I think this is more to the point, is that if in the event of litigation, when you sue the university, the Attorney General defends them. No matter how insane, crazy, racist, sexist, you name it, the conduct or comportment of a university faculty is alleged to be, Andrew Cuomo would go in there and fight to the bitter end in federal court to defend these people.
Yeah, it's his job to do it.
That's right. That seems to me to be fundamentally wrong, because actually, that's why I bring up the issue. The next is the tax-supported. Why is it that if a woman, for example, feels that a faculty member was heinously sexist, she sues in federal court. Cause of action pretty much open and shut, you know. And Cuomo rushes, not Cuomo himself, but the local, his local
agent
person, you know, people will file the, you know, Rule 56 motion to dismiss. Why it seems to be she's paying for people to undermine her right to attend a public tax-supported university. I mean, all that bunch is on the public dole too. The Attorney General. I just wondered, shouldn't there be some type of leveling force involved in this? You
have two very good questions. I'll answer the second one first. You know, in the United States, we have an adversarial legal system where the lawyers for both sides, as a matter of ethics, have to vigorously defend their clients, even if they secretly believe that it's unjust, and even if they secretly believe that their client is guilty, if they're the defense attorney. That's what they do. And we pay for murderers to have defense attorneys to vigorously defend their clients, even when they're guilty and their lawyer pretty much, you know, looks at the evidence and says, yeah, this guy's probably guilty. We still pay for that, and it's because our system in the United States is an adversarial system where we want both sides, and so actually part of kind of the freedom of speech idea, right? That you want both sides to make the best possible case they can, and then you have some neutral observers, as neutral as they can be, the judges or the juries, you know, adjudicate between the two sides. So, you know, that's the way it goes. Now, the problem is that the best attorney for the state of New York is almost always going to be better than the best attorney that any individual can get. So there's always going to be that problem, right? How can you make that a more fair fight? Well, in theory, every lawyer, you know, has an equal chance at it. You know, and the law, you know, treats people equally, so there's equality under the law, you know, but it's tough to be able to kind of overcome that. And it's not something that FIRE really has, you know, an answer to. It's kind of a structural issue in our society and our country. Now, as for the first question about public versus private, I'm not sure if this is the question you were asking, but the question I'll answer is that, as I said to the previous person asking, all of the constitutional rights you have as a citizen, you still have when you step foot on the university campus at a public university. So same Constitution applies, same Bill of Rights apply, And the university can't say, oh, but we have a policy that, no, the policy doesn't trump the Constitution. Now, it's different at a private university because you have decided to go there. You hopefully have done your homework and you know what the Code of Student Conduct says, and it might say, we don't value freedom of speech at all. It might say, we're a religious school and we value Hindu values or Christian values or Muslim values, and those are, you can't disrespect our faith and stay a student at our school. And if you sign on to that and you get kicked out because of your speech, well, that's what you signed on for, right? The First Amendment, the US Constitution don't apply. Now, if you're at a private school which says in its contractual documents like the Student Code of Conduct or the Student Handbook, which is a contract in many jurisdictions, if not all, if it says we value freedom of speech, you should presume that it means freedom of speech the way the Constitution protects freedom of speech, and then all of your rights kind of kick in again. So we'll defend you at a private school that says it protects your freedom of speech, and we'll defend you at any public school. So I'm not sure if that's the question you were asking, but the answer that people should know is any public institution is bound by the First Amendment, just like the rest of the government is.
Binghamton University, there happens to be actually some people who work or have worked on the concept of truth and reconciliation. And I don't know how much you have worked with it. So I was wondering whether you could give any feedback on that. And for people who don't know, I mean, the way I understand truth and reconciliation is actually something initiated or used in South Africa, that it kind of brought the perpetrators and the perpetrator together and thought maybe the easiest way to move forward is if we bring all the people together and have kind of some serious conversation. And
that was remarkably effective, wasn't it? And one of the things they did in South Africa, if I remember correctly, is they said to the people who actually committed crimes, look, it's more important that you talk these issues out than that we prosecute you for this crime. And for some elected officials, maybe this was in the Bosnia case, I forget, they said, look, we have this law that if you were in the other government, you can't take a role in the new government, but if you admit to your crimes, then we will let you take a part in the new government. Now, I forget if that was the right country or not. But one of the things that happened in each case was the people who actually did the bad thing were given something to protect them so that they could come forward and honestly apologize, so that the people who were hurt could say, thank you for apologizing to me, now let's move on. So can that work in a university context?
Do you know of universities that have tried to use this principle?
Well, when people call on the president of a university to apologize to someone who has been wronged, that really seldom happens. And I think it's because there's usually the threat of a lawsuit still if you violated someone's rights to such a degree that they could sue you, and then you say, I'm sorry, I did it, I messed up, I was wrong, I did violate your rights, you're just making it worse for yourself. So
But if some attorneys are involved, then to kind of say, look, if you apologize, we're not going to prosecute, we really
so you could have, so you could have an agreement between the person who is wronged and the person who is potentially being sued to say, look, all we want is an apology, we don't want this to happen again, here are some things you can do and say, and then we'll feel better, and the campus will feel free again to have dissent, and we promise not to sue you because that's not what we want. And I think that maybe is something that could or should happen in this case. If your rights have been violated, you're allowed to sue, and you probably will win. You're only going to win nominal damages for a First Amendment case, like $10, but there are a lot of attorney's fees involved, and on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight something. So, whether it's Andre or some other student, or on any campus, the university doesn't like to get sued. It doesn't like to lose, especially when it knows it's going to lose. And so it's in the interest of the university to just apologize instead. It's a lot easier. It's a lot cheaper. And it actually helps the campus feel that they can move forward. So I would support that in a lot of cases. In fact, I'm trying to get that to happen at Brandeis, where a professor who had been teaching for 47 years without a single student complaint is asked about, or he starts talking about the historical connotations of the term wetbacks, which sometimes has been positive and sometimes has been negative throughout history, and still has both positive and negative connotations for different groups, especially in the Southwest. But since he simply used the term, some student complained about him. He was found guilty of racial harassment. There was no real hearing. And he had a monitor, the associate provost, placed in his classes for the rest of the semester. So, he has a chance to sue if he wants to also, but I'm trying to get the parties together and move forward at Brandeis, which is in a huge public relations nightmare over something else. All they have to do is apologize and move forward, take the letter out of the guy's file, and that would help the whole university move forward. And that is what I am, wearing my fire hat, I'm advocating for that.
I'm a native Binghamtonian and a graduate of SUNY Binghamton. The question that I want to ask is, or I want to first say, Andre Massena, I have worked with him on legal redress of the local NAACP. He's just an average person. He isn't standing here or there with a whole battalion of lawyers and a lot of money. And this university is well aware of that. They may make their statement as a result of the letter that FIRE presented to them, but that's about all they're going to do because they're underhanded. And what they do, it's amazing that people as educated as some of these people are up here would band together, and as you say, you've never seen somebody get a grade of 28 on a paper for social work. And it's incredible. Some of the things that they do because they can do it, and they've gotten away with it. And it takes a special individual to stand up and fight, and that's Andre. So, and there's other people that are going through similar things, but his life, to sum it all up, his life is being uprooted. He doesn't have a lot of money. He takes care of his sister and his mother. And these professors up here that have gone along with this fraud, they need to be jailed. It's like looking at, to me, it's synonymous to what's going on in our economy. They'll tell us that the reason why all of this happened is because a few people stepped back and walked away from their mortgages. And that's why we're bailing out the banks with our money. So it's the same thing here. What are we going to do for Andre? Where is he? Where are the lawyers that are going to represent him? And what is he supposed to do? What is his recourse? Because they can wait him out. I've been there and I've done that. But I won when I went up against the Attorney General. I'm in the books. I took on the state and I beat him. Now the point of the matter is, I want Andre to win. And really all he wanted is he wanted to expose this man who this young lady had already pointed out was not a good man. He's been in that position in the community for years, for eons, and comes from a family that are lawyers. So then he came up here and they offered him a job, whether he's qualified. In fact, he had said, well, I never taught this before. I don't really know that much about it. Maybe you can come up and speak in one of my classes, because he hadn't taught it before. Now, all I'm saying is we've got Andre Massena, and thank God for FIRE, because that has helped him, that's encouraged him. But there's a whole bunch of other people that are just like Andre. And this is like taking on Gargantua, taking on the university. Where is the proactive movement? Now, maybe you can't answer that question because that's not for you to answer, but I mean, you have had the experience of dealing with other schools, so you can see certain things, and I don't know if you see it here, but there's not a whole lot of people here, and that might be due to the weather. But Andre needs help, and these people up here need to be taught a lesson, as far as I'm concerned. If it was me, I think it would be different, but because that's just the way I am, that's just my nature. I fight them to the last breath. That's just the way it is. I have that kind of calling. But what are we going to do for Andre? Does he have recourse?
Well, of course the answer is yes. And what I was trying to express is that if people in the community have violated the community's values and norms, it's up to that community to stand up and do everything it can to fight it. Now, you're one person, and the city of Binghamton is a big city, And even though it might be dominated by the university and by certain officials, that's not everybody. And the courts have to provide legal equality for everybody. And so if there are lawsuits filed on behalf of those who have been wronged and they're valid lawsuits, then they'll win in the long run, in the very long run.
Yeah, the very long run.
But for those who are not willing to wait that long, or if it's the case is not really a legal matter so much as a moral matter, then it really is incumbent on the community who share the morals that you do to work together to fight it in a moral way. Right?
Well, one last thing. We don't have investigative reporters. And Binghamton is not a large city. I did the census back in 1980, and that kind of tells you how old I am. But the bottom line is, Binghamton is not a large city. We have less than 45,000 people now. That's it. And this university in DeFleur, they play an intricate place in everything, with the utilities, with the mayor's office, and the building that's downtown. And so people are afraid to stand up. If you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're wrong, and I don't think she could get a job, and I don't care, I wish she was here, because I've sat down with her and sat on the other side of the table and said what I had to say when one of the professors here went through what she went through. She's doing much better since she's left here. She's at Vanderbilt now. But in any event, you get put into this position here in this university, and you would think that there would be people that would step up that had some kind of integrity, because that's what they espouse. That's what they say that they're teaching, but they're not teaching that. And if you say something, then you're marked. And then they move right in and they clamp down, and that's what's happened to Andre and others.
Well, if you feel that a majority of the city is so corrupt that people can't stand up for what they believe and their own values, then maybe you need to take your fight to someplace broader than the city of Binghamton, right? An organization like FIRE is a national organization, and the American Council of Trustees and Alumni was very happy to write all the SUNY trustees about the Department of Social Work here. So if there's a case that you can make, probably with documentary evidence, that really shows a bad thing that's happened, you will be able to get media coverage that will embarrass the city and embarrass the school. But it's got to be right, it's got to be valid, and it's got to be strong enough that you can actually persuade someone to do the story. If it's just an allegation and these people are corrupt, they're all connected, you're not going to persuade people. But if you can say, well, look, here's the thing that happened to this person, and I can show you why, reporters would love to have it, and they would love to have it outside the city, even if local reporters feel like they'd get in trouble for doing it. Set your sights a little bit higher and broader.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll do that.
I did think it was interesting that that you were here among all these conservatives, and that Andre is actually espousing the beliefs of the CSWE and actually asking that the social work department be liberal in their belief system in the way that they are professing to be, which is the opposite of what the conservative belief system is. But I want to speak for the conservatives in the social work department, although I'm not one. But I did find that conservatives do have a very difficult problem in the MSW program. They do feel repressed. They do feel like they can't speak out, very much in the way that you were saying about the program at the next school that you spoke about after
Missouri
Binghamton.
State, the case of Emily Brooker, a conservative Christian
Exactly.
who didn't want to advocate on the side that her professor wanted her to advocate on.
Exactly, and we have a paper every year in which we have to talk about NASW, the National Association of Social Work values, and those are the one value that specifically upsets the Christian students is gay positive, basically. And I don't think that students got in trouble for writing anything that was, that they didn't agree with it, but I think that they felt afraid. And I felt like as a social worker or a future social worker, I needed to be compassionate to their plight. And I know that people left the program after their first year because they were conservatives, or they just felt like they couldn't speak. And that's unfortunate. And there were specific professors. By the way, it's Wiener, not Weiner.
You know, I wasn't sure. I might also have Massena wrong. I've been saying Massena, but the woman in the back said Massena.
Oh, yeah, it's
So-
Massena.
Massena.
And Wiener. It is
Thank you.
Wiener.
Well, you know, this is a really difficult problem for people in departments of social work to kind of have this double standard. On the one hand, they really feel that they say, you know, I know this because I'm very close with someone who's a social worker and getting an education in social work. They really want their clients to be able to have the resources to do whatever it is they think they want to do or need to do. And so that means not judging the client, right? Let the client have whatever crazy beliefs they want. I'll help you get the resources you need, right? And then on the other hand, telling the social workers, well, you have to have these values in order to be a good social worker. Now, some of the values, like that general value like compassion, sounds like a good value to me, but to say that your value has to be this particular thing on this particular issue, that's where you're crossing the line. And NASW crosses the line in that way. CSWE does. The NCATE, which is the teacher education group, they actually changed their policies so that they weren't crossing the line. And I hope that NASW and CSWE would do the same thing. And there are other professional associations that do the same kind of thing. And their idea is that they want everyone to end up with the same values and beliefs, but they're going to mandate them instead of try to persuade. And that, you know, again, that's where you're crossing the line. As soon as you try to mandate a belief, you're going too far. If you do everything you can to persuade someone and they say, you know, I still don't agree with you, well, then you say, okay, I've done everything I can, but you can still be a social worker anyway. You can still be a teacher anyway. And too many teaching professors and social work professors don't see it that way. And we have evidence, you know, it's very clearly shows it.
As social work students, we had a process for hiring new teachers, and the students were allowed to do interviews with any of the new candidates. And we had 4 new candidates, and 2 were from racial underrepresented groups, and 2 happened to be white, straight males, which were not represented in our program at that time. The only males who were in the program happened to be gay. And not that we were saying, you know, we want them for that reason. We just wanted the person who was going to teach us the best. And those 2 men happened to be, we thought, the best candidates. The woman who happened to be an Asian woman, we couldn't understand because of the language barrier. And we all wrote that in our evaluations. The next day, we were verbally reprimanded for not being culturally competent. And many of us felt that we were being accused of being racist. She was hired. And the men were not. And the other woman was hired, but we thought she was okay. The men were outstanding. Now, we didn't see the other parts of the interview process and the research and whatever, so I'm sure there were other issues. But this woman's language barrier was such an issue that the following year, that is continuing to be an issue. And now she's into her 2nd year. And it continues to be an issue because I've asked other students. And they're like, well, we can't really understand her, but, you know, we do the readings.
Well,
And it's,
yet another reason for the Department of Social Work to be independently investigated.
yeah, exactly.
Right? Again, if you have something like this where you're being reprimanded for honestly presenting your point of view, come to fire. And come to fire sooner rather than later.
I think your comment that you need to go outside the community is very much the case here, because the huge student body and the spending they do here is really the lifeblood of this community. So an awful lot of people in this community are more apt to look at what it's going to mean to the community if this university has any blemishes put on it by somebody who's concerned about justice than they are about whether it's right or wrong. It's sort of irrelevant to them as long as all these students come and spend all this money.
Well, let me give you an idea based on that. There's a place where admitted students go, and there's a place where prospective students go. It's the admissions office, right? There's not all that many ways to get there. If you had a regular group of people with regular protesting outside the admissions office saying, students, think twice before you come here, that would turn heads really fast. That would really get the attention of people who matter, not just prospective students and their parents, which is what we do with our U.S. News and World Report ad, but other people who matter, like the admissions officers, who say, it's not my fault, it's you folks in other departments who are causing problems for me. Do something about this so that we don't have protesters outside our door telling students that they shouldn't be coming here and spending their money on Binghamton University. Now, in the long run, that also might be a good strategy. It's not actually going to make such a difference that BU is going to have to shut down or anything like that. It's not really going to affect the bottom line that much, but it will get people's attention fast. There's a professor at a school in New England who did just that. He distributed a paper to prospective students and their parents showing that his school ranked very low on a ranking of the amount of athletics attention versus academics attention. And his argument was that our school, if you like athletics, maybe you should come here, but there's a lot of lost opportunities because we're spending so much money on athletics instead of academics. And he was passing this out at the admissions office. And that got people's attention really fast. Just an idea.
Also, there's a lot of tour guides that go around the school, especially this week. Would you recommend passing out literature to those people?
Well, look, you know, the point of fighting something you don't like with speech has a lot of options. So one of them, sure, you know, why not? If you have the time, the money, and the effort to put in, you know, pass stuff out to people on campus, and you're allowed to do it. You're allowed to pass out handbills. It's within your First Amendment rights. Pass them out to anybody who will take them. You can't throw them around, right? You can't litter. But if you hand it to someone and they're willing to take it, you're allowed to do that. So go ahead and do it. And, you know, believe me, that pamphlet will get to the right people pretty fast. If the admissions officer, you know, sees people coming in with these things, don't come to BU because of this and this. You know, and posters are good, student newspaper editorials are good, debates are good. Debates are great because then you can get people from both sides, or if the other side fails to show up, you say, so-and-so chose not to come to our debate.
I would like to make a connection with the issue of grade inflation and also your organization following up on students that have been wronged and on whether there's any retaliation. Dus in the case of Andre, dus from what I heard, dus he suddenly got low grades, including that he got like A's for papers, and then suddenly he gets a paper back and it's like full with red comments. There was a letter on your website. So I, as a teacher in the School of Management, I've also noticed that there are different ways of grading, that you just give an A and you don't really have any rules on how you give a grade. Or you can give students detailed feedback, or you can give them a rewrite and resubmit to really give them an opportunity to improve. Now, the question here is, have you kept track of how many professors actually try to retaliate?
It's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. And the reason it's rare is that once fire gets involved and public attention is put on that student and that school, the school knows that it's on notice, that if we do something bad to the student again, we're going to get in even more trouble. Maybe we'll get a lawsuit. You know, we've already backed down once and we had to. Now if we retaliate, it's going to be even worse for us. So they are not going to do it. So it's really rare. You have to feel that you have to basically think that you're going to get away with it in some secret way, or that you're going to be able to prevail. You have some big name behind you to really then retaliate.
So that in other words, this case of Andre could be really used to improve a lot of things that are happening at Binghamton University that people may not really have had an opportunity to have had public discussion about or something.
I think that if this case provides an opportunity for a number of unrelated or semi-related gripes about process or speech or other things, if that helps the dialogue along, I think that's a good thing. But you've got to be careful that a forum that's designed for one purpose not be hijacked for another purpose, right?
But another reason I bring up is that last week I had a conversation with someone from the community who was kind of talking, Andre is like falling behind on his work, he's ignoring his grades, and so that I could kind of see that there is some whispering, that people could really still be retaliating against him by selectively mentioning he's not doing his schoolwork, he's here as a student, he's too much of an activist.
I'll tell you a story that is related to this point and another comment. At the University of Chicago in the year 2000, the president announced that on June 30th, a 500-person dormitory called International House would be closing. The fire marshal told him that because of fire alarm issues and basically not being up to code, that it would have to be closed on June 30th, no questions. And it wasn't his doing, and the fire marshal told him. That turned out to be false. He just wanted to have it closed anyway because there was a secret deal, semi-secret, between the business school and other parties that the business school was going to be able to buy the building, raise it to the ground, and rebuild a new dormitory or some other building. That was the real story. But the public story was the fire marshal told me it just has to be closed. I got very closely involved in this issue because I was a student at University of Chicago, student liaison to the Board of Trustees at the time. And the kinds of things we saw during the controversial period, when the controversy was really happening, is there was whispering, targeted whispering. People making sure that certain people heard certain rumors. And the guy would get back to me because of the position I had. So yes, this happens. Now, did it happen in this case? I don't know. This is the first time I'm hearing, so now we're talking about rumors. I don't really, but it's part of what people do, knowing that they can do it within the law and just kind of get stuff out there, right? So how do you fight stuff like that? Do the best you can to really document it. Say, so-and-so said to me on July 23rd this, and then isn't it an interesting coincidence that that's the same person who did this? And then you let people decide for themselves. And they can either say, well, that's pretty weak evidence, it's just a rumor, or they can say, given all these other things, it makes sense. Or they can say, well, now that's just rumor mongering on the other side. So they can have any reaction they want. And that's just what happens when there's a highly controversial case. People will try to make their moves on both sides. And part of what a good liberal arts education, becoming a good critical thinker, is about, is being able to filter through the rumors and filter through the facts and read carefully and think carefully and actually figure out for yourself, well, what really happened in this case? What's the truth? So it's a good exercise in a time of controversy to put your education into action.
Suppose if your rights are violated and you don't really have the money to get a lawyer or something like that, what happens, and what's the likelihood that if somebody was suspended for a semester or something like that, the other guy, what's the likelihood of having it all be better, and how would that work?
So the question is, what can you do? So there are a number of things you do. First, you appeal immediately. You make sure that you're getting the due process you deserve. If some professor says to you, you're suspended, you're expelled, very unlikely that professor has the authority to do that. Now, maybe you've murdered someone, and there's a policy where anybody who's accused of murder is immediately suspended for the safety of the rest of the campus, right? Maybe you don't deserve very much due process, but if your supposed crime is putting up a poster, say, right? So you immediately appeal, and you read your student handbook very carefully, so you find out who to appeal to, what your deadline is, and you get that appeal going, so that that person's boss knows that you're trying to preserve your rights. And then maybe you file a grievance against the person who you think violated your rights, again, to that person's boss, saying, this person has violated my rights, this is what happened to me. So do the best you can within the system. Now, outside the system, come to fire sooner rather than later, right? Also, make a written record of every oral conversation you have. Ask the person who had this conversation with you to verify that you are correct and that this is what this person said, and this is what you said to me, this is what you said is going to happen to me, and say, if you don't respond back to me within 3 days, I'm going to presume that my account is correct. Now you have a document of the conversation. Now, another thing you should know is that there are a lot of lawyers who like taking on cases for people who are in that situation. We have a legal network of people who like taking on fire-type cases. They work for free, pro bono, or they'll work on contingency, which means that if you win a lawsuit, they get whatever percentage of whatever it is you win. That doesn't really mean anything because in a First Amendment case you win $5 or something. But they also get all their attorney's fees. So they're happy to get their attorney's fees and help somebody who needs help.
They get their fee, like they can charge whatever they want, and basically
they get their reasonable fees. They can't charge anything they want, but they get whatever the judge determines is reasonable for the amount of time they put in. Not taking not taking a case that could have earned them $200 or $500 an hour. They took on this pro bono case. They deserve that same $200 or $500 an hour. If the judge says yes, and if they win a settlement or they win their case. And so there are a lot of lawyers who are going to help you even if you have no money, knowing that, well, this is an open and shut case. This is an easy one. I'm going to win my attorney's fees on this one, and I get to help somebody. Now, you usually don't have to go that far because you file your appeal, you file your grievance, and if your documents are in order, you're going to win. Or if you come to fire and then we publicize it to the country, sometimes the world, you're going to win then. And then if you have to go to court, you have to go to court.